Welcome to Inspire Change, a new inspirational and motivational broadcast that strives to empower, educate, and inspire men in a positive way. Please join me in welcoming Gunter Swoboda, international psychologist, author, speaker, and producer.
Welcome everybody, this is Gunter Swoboda with another season 4 of Inspire Change. Firstly, let me welcome you into 2022. I'm hoping that we're going to certainly have a significantly better time than we did in 21. It's been a struggle for many people. But for many of us, also, I've got to acknowledge that the challenges that we faced in 2021 have taught us a lot. And I want to continue to explore that. And so when I was thinking about what is it that I want to do with season 4, what's the theme that I want to present in season 4, I came across a little thing that was written by an unknown monk in around 1100 AD. And it sort of grabbed me because in many respects it resonates with exactly what I want making good men great and inspire change to foster, to initiate, to plant the seeds. So let me read this out to you. And he said, when I was a young man, I wanted to change the world. I found it was difficult to change the world, so I tried to change my nation. When I found I couldn't change the nation, I began to focus on my town. I couldn't change the town, and as an older man, I tried to change my family. Now, as an old man, I realize the only thing I can change is myself. And suddenly, I realized that if long ago I had changed myself, I could have made an impact on my family. My family and I could have made an impact on our town. Their impact could have changed the nation, and I could indeed have changed the world. Now, what wise words are they? Let's think about that. Now, I've always maintained that what we're looking at doing is not just changing ourselves, but in fact changing who we are within the context. And I've talked about Philip Zimbardo's framework of things being dispositional, situational, and systemic. And in season 4, I want to continue to explore that. And in some respects, I might possibly even be a bit punchier than what I've been, because I've got some serious concerns about where we're travelling. And this is not just in terms of politics, but it's also within the context of what's being promoted with regard to personal growth, spiritual growth, social change. We need to really think critically about what it is that we're engaging in. I've always held a lot of respect for a woman called Bell Hooks, and so I'm going to give you a little bit of wisdom from her end that totally resonates with me in the current climate. She said that I'm often struck by the dangerous narcissism fostered by spiritual rhetoric that pays so much attention to individual self-improvement and so little to the practice of love within the context of community. Now, I can't think of those words being more relevant than in the last 3 years, where COVID-19, rather than bringing us together as a united social force to be a community that pulls together, we've allowed ourselves to be divided. And it saddens me deeply that this is a fact. And it hasn't helped by politicizing the whole epidemic, the pandemic. This should have not been a political issue. This should have been consistently a medical issue, a social issue, that we address together as a community for the betterment and the protection of all of us. You know, the idea to doubt science the way that it's been presented is a nonsense. You know, I keep coming back to the idea that we need to think logically, rationally, and objectively about stuff. And that includes these sorts of issues. Now, Inspire Change as a podcast is embedded in the notion of making good men great. Now, I'm not just talking to men, obviously. I'm talking to women as well. And partly because all of us have been indoctrinated or socialised with patriarchal values. And patriarchy, in my view, is that toxic ideology that contaminates how we relate with each other. And it also contaminates the way that we think about things. Okay, so the whole point, for example, of understanding how we think about history, how we think about psychology, how we think about medicine, has been tainted by patriarchy. And you might go, well, that's a bit hectic. Are you really sure you want to put it out there to that degree? Well, yes, I will. Firstly, let me talk a little bit about archaeology. In many respects, archaeology was so influenced by the thinking of men that we actually didn't necessarily think about how we could see the things that we're digging up from a different perspective. Okay, so what am I talking about? For many, many, many decades, most graves that have been excavated that have contained the skeletal remains of people, often, especially if they contained weapons, were deemed immediately to be that of men. Well, with the emergence of better technology about, identifying what's what, we've come to realise that that's actually not the case. In fact, a lot of those graves of so-called warriors were in reality that of women. So what conclusion do we need to draw from that? Well, firstly, we need to draw the conclusion that not all warriors are men. It also raises the question of what position women held within these societies. And again, patriarchy has, by and large, attempted to relegate women into a secondary role, often into a hidden role. Now, some women obviously emerge from that, but it's our interpretation of the information, the data that's presented to us, which is really critical. Now, that also goes further back. So if I look at our understanding of human evolution, traditionally, looking at it through a patriarchal lens, right, we've seen human evolution from a competitive perspective. And that includes the way that we might have dealt with Neanderthals or Cro-Magnon. And that is that, when Homo sapien arose, as it were in patriarchal terms, as the top dog, the alpha species, all these other species died off because we were just better than them. And some of that better than them translated into the idea of conflict between these species. Well, what if that whole thing's just rubbish? And in fact, now we're starting to see through DNA, the work of DNA and a whole range of rethinking this field, that the whole process of human evolution is not, in fact, linear the way that we thought about it. And it's certainly not based on this notion that we're just more competitive in the space. What it actually comes down to is that we actually got better, if you want, because we actually interbred with species like Denisovians and Neanderthals. Now, the current thinking is that most Homo sapiens have at least 1 to 3% Neanderthal DNA. Now, we're still working on how what the percentage is with Denisovians, but there's a whole range of other human groups that are not Homo sapien that we've intermingled with. Now, in the counter-revolution of the 60s, there was one very specific slogan that kept rising to the fore, and that essentially was make love, not war. So if I look at it, I could actually argue that as a human species, that's what we actually applied in the beginning. We didn't bash each other over the head constantly and kill each other off. What we did was we interbred, we intermingled, we worked together. Right? There was probably significantly less conflict than we'd like to think. And the idea that the caveman dominated women by, cracking her over the head and dragging into the cave, I don't think is exactly right either. And there's a huge amount of data that challenges any of these mythologies. So we really need to step out of the patriarchal value set of being territorial, about being status oriented, about being acquisitional and competitive, and take a completely different look, not just at ourselves, but also our human journey. And never in our lives has this been as important as now. I was reading an interesting article which suggested that currently the doomsday clock has us 100 seconds until midnight. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the doomsday clock, let me just very quickly explain what it is that I'm talking about. So for the past, I think it's been about 75 years, we've had this clock, right, that is set every year by experts, okay? And that clock, although it's an imperfect metaphor, looks at how close are we from extinction, okay? So, during the 60s and 70s, it was about nuclear exchange, but also it included the whole notion of catastrophic climate change. And here's the important bit that could wipe us out as humanity. Well, if it's climate change or in Don't Look Up, a meteor that's going to impact on the Earth, the complete annihilation of the planet. This is pretty scary. And right now politicians are in furious discussions about a potential conflict in Europe, with Russia threatening to invade the Ukraine. Now, Europe hasn't had a significant war for quite a long time. Not a clean record. I mean, if I think back on the issue about Kosovo and Serbia and so on, it's been tainted, but we haven't done too badly. But now it's getting rickety. So what is it that I'm talking about out of this, right? Let me bring it down to the bare bones. What I want us to explore intellectually, psychologically, is the notion that over the last 40 years, roughly, we have encountered a growing narcissism. And it's been fostered through, a narcissistic approach to self-help, to personal growth. We need to think broader than that because it's bringing us closer to extinction. Why is it that we go to war? It's usually because a bunch of guys want to, get some brownie points in some form or another. And as a politician, there's nothing better than a war to get, the population distracted from what some of the real issues are. Now, a lot of you may take objection to this, but I'm going to challenge you to think about this very, very critically and stay on it, right? So how can I grow as a man to be great without becoming narcissistic? How can I be a woman who lives in a society where we engage and foster cooperation, where we foster, respect and empathy, to maintain democracy, to be inclusive, and we continue to have struggles socially in accepting First Nations. A lot of our laws and our attitudes are still divisive, not just from us as individuals, but also from our leadership. We need to begin to dismantle this, and we need to think about a better way of being, not just in relationship to gender, but also as a humanity. Again, some of you may think that I'm being partisan here. Somehow I'm this radical lefty. I'm not either. Those ideas of left and right are actually a nonsense. How do you define left and right? We need a different approach, and I want to help to have that meaningful conversation through what I'm presenting in the podcast. So until next time, let me help to inspire change. Let me help you to help yourself to create a better way of being, not just in yourself, but also within your families, within your town, possibly within the nation. So until next time, this is me signing off. Be safe. Take care of each other.
Gunter Swoboda does individual and group coaching for men looking to grow. For more information on this and the global Making Good Men Great movement, check out goodmengreat.com. If you have a topic for the show or would like to be a guest on the air, please email miranda@nortainment.com. That's miranda@noirtainment.com. Thank you, and always keep inspiring change.